Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Get ready for an extraordinary episode featuring the brilliant Noah Healy. Drawing inspiration from Alan Turing's visionary contributions that reshaped the course of history, Noah has harnessed computational mathematics and software development to drive internal productivity, enhance client efficiencies, and revolutionize regulatory compliance. As the founder of COORDISC and the mastermind behind CDM, Noah is at the forefront of reordering the global financial system. CDM's groundbreaking technology promises to establish a better exchange market for commodities, offering market clearing prices, improved price discovery, and reduced transaction costs. With this, Noah recognizes the immense responsibility that comes with developing algorithmic technology products. With a firm commitment to ethics and morality, he approaches his work as an algorithmist with a conscience, using tools like game theory to ensure that his products drive results while upholding ethical standards. Join me today as Noah shares his insights on leveraging technology for positive change and navigating the intersection of innovation and ethics. Noah, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me here, Lisa.
And algorithmist is a tongue twister that I got through that one. Wow.
Yeah. Well, the state of affairs that exists in the computer landscape is such that we just make up words constantly to describe what's going on. And unfortunately, most of the people that do that are way better at sales and marketing than I am, and a lot worse at ethics and reason. So we have a lot of things that are very bad ideas that have very catchy names.
And I will always want to have the tongue twister name that is upholding ethical standards and delivering quality results to clients. So Noah, why don't you take us through your journey? Because my read-in is always, it is what it is, but your story means more to the audience than me describing you. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are today, and why what you're doing today is so important.
Well, I sort of dove into computers backwards. So I got employed and then learned what they were and how they work. But the reason I got informed of what they were and how they work is because of my background in training and engineering, and the notion that if you're getting paid for something, you should actually know what you're talking about. And that is unfortunately quite rare in the industry. Computers are so easy to use, even human beings can do it. But that has led to a lot of work and products being produced by very shallow conceptions, both in the creation. So everybody's sort of familiar with shoddy hardware and shoddy software much more often these days, where computer stuff doesn't seem to have quite the finish of products that used to exist decades ago. But it also exists socially, where, from Amazon to Facebook to Google, these things were just sort of tossed out into the world to see what happened, and then the world reacted to them, and sort of now we're here where these things exist as multinational brands. And so my journey was very sort of focused inward. I got a job programming computers. I learned the basic language that was being used at the company I was working at. But then I started reading the papers on not only how computer languages in general and that computer language specifically worked, but also the various breakthroughs that went into computational improvements. And those papers were very fascinating. So I just kept studying and working in that space. And there's a lot of a lot of very juicy things going there. So at this point, a little over a decade ago, I left a job that I was at because I had automated the job for which I was hired, and there was no career opportunities at the business that I was working for. And I could see some of the writing on the wall. Several companies I'd worked for had essentially failed when management made decisions that was contradicted by computer files that they owned. So one of the first companies I worked for, they set up this revenue plan based around this prize thing for their customer base, and it turned out that their primary customer base despised the prize plan to the degree that the number one association for their entire site with leaving and never returning was seeing the prize plan. So they spent enormous money on content, which most of their users never saw, and the users that did see all of it didn't care about the content they were creating. They cared about other aspects, the social aspects of the content. And those repeat customers hated the prize plan and were going to leave forever. So they could have probably remained in business by spending a tenth as much on content and being able to support themselves on their ad revenue and grow organically. But they blew out their cash supply, and then they were bankrupt. And I've seen other similar kinds of situations where the company, in theory, knew what the wrong answer was, but management went forward with the wrong answer because it's not possible to read every single file on every computer you own as a business manager. And I could see various trend lines. We've seen IoT, we've seen now AI, we're seeing, exploding social media. We're seeing a much more chaotic and noisy information landscape around us. And so I decided to think about the problem of extracting coherent knowledge from a network of agents. And when I found an algorithm that efficiently approaches that problem, I applied it to marketplaces and discovered that it was a radically more efficient way to achieve marketplace systems. And then I have been on my current pursuit of trying to bring this to the world. As part of that, I've studied a great deal about the history. Again, I sort of always start with doing the reading and doing the math. And so, like everybody who was alive since the turn of the millennium, I'm familiar with, the market's sudden propensity to have crashes every once in a while. It became clear to me that if you analyze the marketplace as a information processing system, and specifically a noise cancellation signal boosting system, the existence of the internet and computational technology basically destroys the market's ability to keep doing its historical function. And so the markets that we have today are not the markets that existed 20 or 40 and certainly not 60 or more years ago. And the markets that we have today are basically just telling us fiction. The amount, over 95% of the traders in the marketplace are computers that are attempting to formulate strategies to outfox other computers in trading. And humans that get caught in the gears are just sort of ancillary casualties. It'd be like if you were playing football and people started bringing trucks onto the field, and also decided to get rid of this 11-man rule. And so there was 500 trucks on each side. And if you were still insisting that you could play linebacker, you're just irrelevant at that point. Like that's sort of where we are. We're not playing the game and we're not getting the outcome. And so what's required is a new game, one that actually is built around what we actually need. And one of the very powerful things and what drove me into this mathematics in the first place is that computational mathematics and information theory gives us tools to think about imagination and ideas in mechanical and quantifiable methods.
Let's
And
stop and play with this for a minute,
sure.
because a lot of people probably just went, wait a minute, time out. Mathematics, creativity, innovation, right? These things are sort of different, but you're going to take us through how they connect, and how the math, if we solve the problem mathematically, how it opens up the ability for innovation and those outcomes to be known.
Yeah, well, so this is Alan Turing, who's become a lot more famous in the last couple decades. This was his insight, and it's funny to me because that's not the insight he was trying to come up with. He was trying to solve a math problem, and in order to solve this math problem, the best way he could find was to incidentally prove that you could do this. So what Turing did was said, okay, let's imagine this relatively simple machine. So it's something called a state machine. So the way a state machine works is that it has some finite number of states. So you can write them all down, and it's in only one of these states at a time. So things like a light switch would be a state machine. It can be on, it can be off, it can't really be anything else. Turing's state machine was a little bit more complicated than a light bulb. What it could do is read a symbol that's on a paper tape, and it could write a new symbol on that slot in the paper tape, and it could move left or right along that paper tape. And that's what it could do. Now, he never built one of these. This is just an imaginary thing, but people actually have built Turing machines, and it's relatively easy to understand that this is a thing that could be constructed if you were so inclined and had the expertise. So what Turing does is says, okay, you can get one of these things to write down any number that you can imagine, because in the worst case scenario, you could just write down the instructions for how to write every single symbol in the number into the state table and just have it crank those numbers out. So this thing can write any number you can imagine. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create one of these things that has a program inside of it, where instead of giving it a blank tape to write numbers down on, I can write down symbols that correspond to states in some other Turing machine. And the program I write will be able to read the symbols on this tape and behave like it's that other Turing machine that is the symbols that are written down on this tape. So essentially, I don't have to build one of these things that can do, one of these things that writes down the number 1,000,000, and then another one that writes down the number 1,000,001, and another one that, does addition and calculus and so on. I can make one of these Turing machines, and I can write down descriptions of the other Turing machines. And this thing will behave like any other description of Turing machine I write down. And that turns out to be a complicated process, but that is the core of how computers work. What computers are doing is taking instructions and behaving as if they're the machine that's being described in their instructions. And this, as we're building out, 3D printing and more physical space, it's becoming clearer and clearer that more and more of the physical universe, in fact, operates through computational principles. And in point of fact, the thing on Earth that's the closest sort of in shape and conception to Turing's model of general computation is DNA. It is a very long symbol tape that has these machines that can go along and sort of create the machines that are according to the instructions that are on that symbol stream. So life, ideas, all of these things become encompassed within this structure. Now, this is where Turing really gets brilliant, because he's imagined this device that can do anything you can imagine. And the reason he does this is to actually disprove that something's possible. And the way that he disproves that something's possible is he demonstrates that it's impossible for this imagination machine to do it. And so if it's not even possible to imagine that something is possible, then it's impossible. And so we get the non-constructive impossibility proof, which is this incredibly powerful idea, and something that's really a deep-seated change to how we think as people. Most people see their imaginations as infinite and unboundable and unconstrained, and that's sort of true, except that just like everything else, this recursive conception of possibility creates these walls in imagination itself, and that's what we now have to contend with when we're exploiting these new ideas.
And as you take all of this knowledge, and one of the things that I really enjoy about listening to you talk through this, Noah, is so many people today are generalists and know a little bit about everything, and there is absolutely no depth of knowledge behind what they do and how they do it. And you are going very deep into computational mathematics, right? And asking why and learning more. And this continuous journey of learning is feeding what you're building. With where you're at and what you're trying to accomplish, what's the goal? What are you going after?
The goal is setting up these markets and getting people to actually use them. So the thing about service industries, and finance is a service industry, is that it's a dead weight loss. So if you get sick and you go to the doctor and they treat you and you get better, that's terrific. But if you could get that exact same service for half the price, then in addition to being well, you would also be much better off economically. The current overheads from our existing commodity markets in this country alone are on the order of $1 trillion a year. And so that is several percent of the economy. And if we were not paying that money to those middlemen, we would have that money available to develop the productive industries of this country and other countries around the world. We're not the only people paying into that. And that would be a considerable upgrade in the economic growth and general economic well-being of almost all of our species. And even for those people whose jobs would in fact be eliminated by this setup, suddenly starting up a farm and homesteading becomes a much higher rate of return proposition. So they might be able to get jobs developing new kinds of tractor technology or doing something else that drives productivity versus driving this, once again, this sort of race to the bottom by algorithms arguing with each other about fantasies.
And I think what you're hinting at in that is that it also allows a refocus on things that are tangible, that are real, right? Farming, right? Food. We're building and creating something that literally feeds people that provides, and it gives us the ability to provide shelter and other things so that we're actually lifting up quality of life and not chasing an imaginary dollar.
I'm starting there because, well, the benefits are so much easier to see and move forward with. But if you sort of open up a long-term plan of like after the human race is twice as wealthy, uh, this general basic stance of ethical reconsideration of what services are. I'd mentioned before that I started this journey because I'd automated the job that I was hired for. That's something that I've done at a few places. Unfortunately, it's not something that businesses currently seek out and incentivize. Most bureaucrats aren't terribly interested, and most managers are bureaucrats, in having lower headcounts that are reporting to them, or reaching a point where their department no longer has a function within the system because reorganization or simply productive automation has meant that it's not necessary for it to be there anymore. But the advantages of moving work into inanimate objects are enormous. We are, privilege gets thrown around in ways that I'm very uncomfortable with, but we live in an incredibly privileged time. In the United States of America, 97% of all work is done by machines, just in a straight up physical, stance. And globally, it's still well over 50% of all work on Earth is done by machines. And if we had to do that work, if we turned off all the motors, most of us would die because there's too much work making the food and shelter and clothing for human muscle to do it all. Right now, virtually all of the thinking that's done is done by people, in spite of the fact that we have a globalized network with vastly more information in it than has ever been recorded before. But it's relatively easy to see ways in which we could start shifting some of that burden onto machines. And we're doing it, we're very intentionally doing it, and we're doing it in a very backwards fashion. The current sort of funding goes towards removing the jobs at the bottom of our society. But in fact, it's the jobs at the top of our society that are best suited to what the computers are actually good at.
And I love the topic and I love where you're heading, but Noah, that's a whole nother show for us to dive into.
Okay.
That is a whole different topic because I wholeheartedly agree, right? Thinking jobs are really the jobs that our generative AIs, as they grow and mature, are the ones that they're going to go after and make the big positive impacts. What I want to do at this point is ask you to share, if guests are interested in what you're talking about and they want to learn more, how do they find you and what you're doing, your socials,
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
URL?
Yeah. So I actually host a podcast talking about AI and its impacts on society called The Fourth Age, the AI Revolution, with the former CTO of Reddit, a guy named Marty Wiener. I also have a petition. I'm working on a patent on my coordinated discovery market idea that the patent office refuses to move forward with for reasons that it won't go into for some reason. So I have a petition up on change.org under CDM patent. If you'd like to learn more about CDM specifically, the website coordisc.com, COORDISC, has that. Or if you'd like to ask me any questions, Noah P. Healy at yahoo.com, or reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Noah Healy there, and that's how to get in touch with me.
All right, audience, for you guys, all of that information will be in the show notes, so it's easy to grab and action if you're interested in reaching out with Noah. But the things that we talked through today are actually, incredibly powerful. And Noah, I really want to thank you for sharing, right? That perspective on your journey and some of those lessons you learned early in your career, and how there's, a propensity in our society today for shoddy work, right? The shallow understanding and trying to solve problems. I would talk about it in that agile mindset where we try things, we throw them out, and we keep repeating and iterating until something's actually valuable, rather than taking a more holistic approach and solving the mathematical problem so we know specifically what we're going after. It is in direct competition with the prevailing logic of America today. And I love that what you're doing challenges that norm, because it is important to go after the quality outcomes. We also, you talked about the idea in one of your experiences where an employer went out of business because they weren't listening to the data. From the audience perspective, we talk a lot about being customer centric in the programs that we do here, and understanding what the data says about what our customer needs will tell us whether or not our businesses are going to survive. And so Noah walked us through an opportunity where we can see if we actually do the math and understand and apply the data that we have at our disposal, we make a really positive impact to our customers. And what we do and how we do it is absolutely irrelevant if we're not serving our customers. And Noah ultimately, right, is swinging big and trying to change our commodities market and bring to bear solutions that will, in the long term, impact the quality of life, the wealth of our community, and how we sustain as a society into the future, because what we're doing today absolutely won't work. Noah, thank you for being here with us and sharing your insights. It was a pleasure.
Thanks again for having me here.
Absolutely. And audience, you know the rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Every single week, one lucky listener that posts a review on iTunes will win the grand prize drawing, a $15,000 private VIP day with Lisa Levy. And be sure to head over to disruptandinnovate.com and get your free copy of Lisa's gift. And join us on our next episode.